The news of a double-dip recession in Britain has fuelled the already growing anger about whether austerity drives can deliver any sort of solution for Europe. One man who has studied Europe's drama in the context of previous financial crises and its potentially damaging impact on globalisation is Harold James, Professor of History at Princeton University and the European Institute in Florence. I spoke with him earlier. Professor Harold James, welcome to the programme.
Hello, good to be with you.
Now, you've written that rescuing the euro this year was personalised as a tango between Nicolas Sarkozy and Angela Merkel. What are the implications of a breakup of the Merkozy duo?
I think there was an unfortunate story in that the whole business of dealing with the euro should have been done by European institutions, by the Commission, by the European Council. But in fact, it got concentrated in this relationship between France and Germany, between President Sarkozy and Chancellor Angela Merkel. And now Sarkozy is looking as if he's going to pay the price for that.
In fact, just on this, there was a rather unfortunate event at one of President Sarkozy's hustings, wasn't there?
Yes. Well, this was the last speech he did, the last rally he did before the first round of the presidential elections. And he was standing in front of this big placard, which was supposed to say, La France forte, strong France. And his head obscured the E, so it looked as if it was Le Franc fort, the strong franc. And there is obviously, at least with some people, a nostalgia for the currencies that existed before the euro, for the French franc. And Marine Le Pen has been pushing the anti-euro cause very, very articulately and very forcefully.
This significant rise of the right, will it deliver a shift from austerity to growth in policy making, more stimulus perhaps?
If you think of the preconditions for growth, they really don't lie in governments doing things. And this, in a way, was one of the mistakes of the past. If you think of Spain, they had these enormous public infrastructure expenditures on high-speed railroads, on airports, and so on. And they're unused. So really the story about trying to unleash growth in Europe, and it's very, very important to get that happening, it's really a private sector story, and it's difficult to see how that's going to be done by pronouncements from the top.
Well, if it really is only the private sector that can save Europe, what is going through the mind of the Brussels bureaucrat?
Well, they're seeing some hopeful measures. What the new Italian government is doing, for instance, is exactly in line with this vision of unleashing the private sector, getting rid of restrictions that had previously really hampered Italian firms. You can see an awful lot of Italian firms, for instance, that are exactly 49 employees because they don't want to employ a 50th. That would push them into some kind of really complex regulation. And that's the kind of regulation that Mario Monti's government is trying to get rid of. And I think in Greece and Spain there are similar initiatives.
Now, your book, The End of Globalisation, looks at the lesson learned from the Depression to show how financial crises provoke a backlash against globalisation. Do you see that happening now? We have Occupy, but do you see it in nationalism, protectionism, even anti-immigration?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the story of the voting in the elections in France. I think it will be part of the story of the elections in Greece as well, and you will see an enormous amount of support, both for very radically right-wing parties and for left-wing anti-Europe, anti-global parties. And they will focus in part on the monetary policies of the ECB, but they also focus, and this was a big emphasis in Marine Le Pen's campaign, and it's been taken up by Sarkozy now before the second round, on immigration.
So how do you now see attitudes within Europe towards Germany?
Germany has become the focus of a great deal of the frustration. In the past, I think people who were upset about globalization in Europe liked to portray globalization as an American phenomenon that was imposed by the United States. They've turned now to see Germany, maybe also China, but principally in European terms, Germany, as the big enemy. And it's Germany that they regard as forcing austerity on the rest of Europe. And in that regard, some of the discussions obviously go back to stereotypes about Germany in the first half of the 20th century into the Second World War.
One scenario talked about last year was that instead of Greece leaving the euro, that Germany should leave the euro. Is that at all likely?
I don't think it's likely in the present scenario, but it's something that many Germans are secretly thinking of, I believe. But they're also thinking that Germany isn't unique in this position. Germany is surrounded by a number of countries that think very much in economic terms like Germany. Sometimes Germans like to think, and they spin a kind of fantasy about developing a northern euro, which would involve the Scandinavian countries, would involve Switzerland, Austria, the Netherlands, and would represent a very different vision of how the economy is to be managed than the one that you have in this very mixed and diverse eurozone at the moment.
Finally, speaking of globalisation, do you have any view on the backlash to the global empire of Rupert Murdoch?
I think that's also a very characteristic phenomenon that at every stage when globalization has broken down in the past, people have identified particular companies as the representatives of evil, actually often more evil than governments. If you think back to the country that I'm a citizen of and living in, the United States, the United States was formed because of a revolt, not just against the British government, but against the East India Company. And in a sense, Rupert Murdoch is the equivalent of a modern East India Company.
Professor Harold James, very good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure being with you.